Imagine this: 480 soldiers, pinned, ammo nearly gone, surrounded by enemy muzzles flashing from every ridge. Command was already drafting their obituary. Protocol screamed, "Hold." But what if waiting meant certain death? What if one overlooked rifle could silence the storm and rewrite their fate? Imagine this: 480 Legionnaires, pinned, ammo nearly gone, surrounded by enemy muzzles flashing from every ridge. Command was already drafting their obituary. Protocol screamed, "Hold." But what if waiting meant certain death? What if one overlooked rifle could silence the storm and rewrite their fate? The air in the support compound of the Kandar province hung thick with white dust, baked by the harsh midday sun. It seeped into every crease of gear, every fiber of uniform. Inside the main chow hall, the careless clang of trays and sharp bursts of laughter echoed off concrete walls, a fragile sound of men filling their plates and lungs before another patrol. But far from that clatter, a solitary figure sat cross-legged on a worn tarp. Sergeant Aris Thorne, barely over 5 feet, moved with the quiet precision of a clock, every action deliberate, unhurried. Her M193 Long-Range System wasn't just a rifle, it was an extension of her mind. She ran a cloth through the bore, checked the bolt face, then jotted notes into a small, spiral-bound notebook balanced on her knee. She logged each adjustment like scripture: clicks on the scope, changes in humidity, the subtle wear on the muzzle. She knew exactly how her rifle would breathe in these arid wastes. 2 junior Legionnaires drifted past, their smirks like a physical shove. "There's the quota sniper," one muttered, loud enough to catch the dust-filled air. "Paper shooter," the other added, a laugh like a dry cough. "Good thing cardboard doesn't shoot back." Neither slowed, neither expected a reply. Aris didn't give one. She polished the bolt and scribbled another line in her notebook. She had heard it all before. Dead weight. Mascot. Check the box. Too small. Too quiet. Too different. Even seasoned sergeants, men marked by multiple deployments, brushed her off. "Thorne's good for range scores," one had told Colonel Valerius. "But for combat? Stick her on radios, keep her useful." And so they did. Her assignments were support duty, hauling gear, checking comms, running logistics. Never asked to climb ridges, never asked to peer through her scope in a real fight. Always told, politely, to stay in her lane. What they never saw, because they never looked, was the private doctrine Aris Thorne had built in the silence of long nights. Her story didn't begin in the Kandar province. It started in the desolate canyons of the Red Mesa territory, where evenings smelled of sun-baked dust and dry sage, and the horizon stretched forever over cracked earth. Her father, a veteran whose body had returned from distant wars broken, but whose discipline remained iron, raised her with core tenets: chores at dawn, fences mended before breakfast. And at dusk, as the sky turned purple and the air cooled, he'd line empty cans on fence posts and hand her a battered hunting rifle. "Steady breath," he'd say, his voice a low rumble. "Slow trigger. Let the shot surprise you." By 12, she could knock every can down at 50 yards, without hesitation. By 16, she outshot most of the grizzled hunters who came to their land. Her father rarely said much, but the quiet pride in his eyes spoke volumes. When he passed unexpectedly during her senior year, Aris joined the Legion, partly to honor him, but mostly to prove the discipline he'd etched into her bones was worthy. It was enough to earn her a sniper billet, an achievement few reached. But here, in the Kandar province, paper credentials meant little against cemented opinions. The compound itself was a bubble of brittle routine, the trolls rolling out, reports ticking in, briefings repeating the same clipped lines, Aris moved along its edges, noticed but never valued. Then the orders dropped. 480 Legionnaires with attachments were tasked to sweep a valley believed to be lightly defended. Intelligence painted it as a routine operation: secure, clear, stabilize. The maps showed straightforward ridgelines and open ground. Command sold it as simple. Aris, sitting in the back of the briefing, her notebook balanced on her thigh, read the terrain differently. The contour lines screamed danger. Narrow approaches, high ground on 3 sides, kill zones ready to ignite. She raised her hand once, calm and steady. "Sir, have we considered this valley being a deliberate trap? These folds here," she pointed at the projected map, "they could conceal a strong enemy force. It looks too neat." Colonel Valerius, running the briefing, barely glanced at her name tape. "Sergeant, track equipment, not strategy. That's above your pay grade." A low chuckle rippled through the room. Dead weight talking tactics. Aris closed her notebook. She stayed silent. What would you do in that silence, with a dangerous truth ignored? When the session ended, Legionnaires slung rifles, adjusted helmets, and joked about how quick the sweep would be. From the edge of the room, Aris watched them gear up, climb into transports, and roll toward the valley's mouth. 480 Legionnaires, moving by doctrine, carrying confidence, untouched by doubt. She remained behind, assigned again to support duty. Her tasking was simple: monitor comms, track supply movements, stay out of the operational lanes. It was all she'd been told, all she'd been conditioned to accept. But as the dust of departing vehicles drifted across the compound and their silhouettes shrank into the shimmering horizon, Aris felt the weight of every figure she'd logged in her notebooks, every line she'd drawn across maps under midnight light. She had envisioned this valley long before the orders dropped. She had pictured exactly how it would close. And now, with 480 Legionnaires driving into its jaws, she was left behind, sidelined. The taste of dust in her mouth was bitter, not from the desert air, but from an unspoken dread, a certainty she couldn't share. What awaited them was not a routine sweep, but a meticulously planned, unforgiving ambush. She knew it. They did not. And she was powerless to stop it. The next morning, the briefing room buzzed with the bravado of men convinced the map would obey. Aris sat in her usual seat near the back, her notebook steady on her thigh, a pencil tucked behind her ear. Colonel Valerius dragged a red dot across the projected terrain: ridges, roots, strong points, all clean on the screen, but brutal in reality. When he paused for questions, Aris lifted her hand with the same measured steadiness she used behind a scope. "Sir, this valley is a trap," she said evenly, her voice cutting through the casual chatter. "These folds create intersecting fire lanes. If they position heavy weapons on the spurs and anti-armor teams in the draw, our convoys will be pinned inside a bowl." He didn't follow her pointer. He simply glanced at her name tape. "You're here to track radios, Sergeant, not give strategy." Laughter stirred again. A junior Legionnaire scribbling notes winked at his comrade. Aris's fingers tightened around the cardboard back of her notebook, then slowly released. The colonel clicked onward, and the red light erased her from the frame. On the range the next day, the wind quartered left to right, just enough to make easy shots honest. Aris lay prone, narrowing the world into a reticle and the shimmering heat haze. She dialed her adjustments. Inhale, exhale. The steel plate rang, steady and indifferent. "Look," a young private muttered when the 500-meter plate jumped. A grizzled gunnery sergeant spat into the dust. "Clay pigeons don't shoot back," he drawled, "and paper doesn't scream." Aris logged each shot by habit: distance, wind, hold, impact, then stripped her rifle to 0, offering no defense. Later, in the mess hall, trays squealed along the rails. 4 Legionnaires across from Aris rose in unison, scraping their chairs as they moved to a distant table. "Babysitter with a rifle," one muttered, not bothering to hide the contempt. She kept eating, her jaw steady, spoon quiet against the bowl. The only sound she allowed herself in the long hours that followed was the scratch of pencil on paper, darkening the contour lines where the valley pinched tight like a closing fist. During a base patrol near the motor pool, 2 elite operatives from a sister unit strolled past, their movements exhibiting the relaxed symmetry of men who read each other by subtle cues. A few Legionnaires from Aris's company leaned near a armored transport, watching as she adjusted an antenna. "Dead weight," one announced, as if delivering news. "Never seen a sniper scared to deploy." One of the elite operatives' mouths tugged at the corner. The other exhaled a short, dry chuckle. Aris finished the radio check, logged the serial number, and moved on. The insults had grown from whispers to pointed phrases to names meant to staple her place in the pecking order. Meanwhile, 480 Legionnaires, unaware of the trap, pushed deeper toward the valley. For a time, the radios ticked with routine administration, position checks, fuel updates, standard reports. Drone feed showed convoy dots moving along a dirt finger, the image bending with heat shimmer. Then the rhythm skipped. One report never came. Then 2 voices overlapped, frayed at the edges. Someone called for dismounts. Someone else cursed an engine that wasn't the issue. Then came the sound you hear once and never forget. The break in a man's voice when the world ahead of him erupts. "Contact! Contact!" Static swallowed the rest. Another net cut in. "Taking fire! East Ridge!" A third voice tried to report and collapsed into ragged breaths. The feed bloomed with heat signatures. Muzzle flashes stitched angry commas across the ridges. Smoke pulsed from the draw. Convoy dots compressed and froze. Conversations in the command center sank into murmurs. The watch officer lowered his headset and stared at nothing, as if willing the screen to change by sight alone. A junior officer grabbed for a checklist, skimmed it, and found no line for what he saw. Chairs stopped scraping. The room recalibrated into a soundscape of shallow breaths, clicking cursors, and the generator's hum, broken only by one phrase repeated like a shield. "Hold position. Wait. Follow protocol." What does it feel like when the rules you're trained to follow become the very thing that condemns you and your comrades to certain death? "Too hot," a major said, relieved to find the wording. "No air support inside 200 meters. A captain repeated it louder, as if volume could turn it into action. "Rules are clear. We hold outside the bubble." On a side monitor, a helmet cam showed dust crawling over grass, the horizon jerking with heavy breathing. Rounds chewed the dirt near boots. Bearings were shouted without conviction. Aris edged closer to the back rail, her eyes fixed on a drone angle that just caught the crown of a heavy weapon emplacement along the eastern spur. She counted bursts, mapped its traverse in her head, read the wind in the way the smoke bent. Colonel Valerius asked for options. The major quoted the manual. "We need them to bound out of the engagement zone. Then we can bring steel." His tone made waiting sound like strategy. "They can't bound," a captain admitted quietly. "Then they hold," the major answered, clinging to the line. The earlier laughter had no citizenship here. Men who had smirked now busied their hands. Jokes died into silence. Aris laid her palm against the canvas of her rifle case. The familiar drag of rough leather steadied her, not out of defiance, but clarity.
On the feed, the heavy weapon on the eastern spur began sweeping bursts down a gully where Legionnaires clawed low to stay unseen. An anti-armor team in the draw shifted for a clean shot, knees digging into dirt. "Too hot," the major repeated, clinging to the phrase. "Nobody's asking for ordnance," Aris Thorne said at last, her voice quiet but cutting through the tension. "A rifle will do." Colonel Valerius turned slightly, not enough to count as attention. "We are not authorizing anything that violates the 200-meter rule." "It's not about authorization," she replied. "It's geometry."
Give me a position and time, and I'll cut their anchors without touching ours.
A captain let out a laugh that cracked halfway through. "You'll solve a battalion fight with a scope and an opinion, Sergeant? Stay in your lane." A junior legionnaire from the doorway, the same one who loved the nickname, tossed in his chorus. "Dead weight wants a field trip." The radios made new noises, the flattened syllables of men standing on the edge. A squad leader tried to climb from panic to command and slipped. "Command, this is Bravo. We are pinned, casualties mounting. We cannot push. We cannot pull back. We need—" The colonel asked for artillery clearance. The answer came late. Wrong for the angles. Smoke was suggested, then dismissed. The wind would weaponize it against their own. The drone shifted views and caught just enough of the heavy weapon's emplacement on the spur to make Aris's palms itch. Dust coughed from the muzzle. The traverse ticked like a metronome.
She knew the space between bursts. She knew the gap her bullet needed. She unzipped the rifle case. The sound was small, but a first sergeant near the door still looked up, ready to shut it down. The M193 slid free, the honest heft of steel and glass. By feel, she checked the bolt, locked a magazine, and shouldered the sling. "I can end this," she whispered. She said it not only against the steel, but against the muscle memory of obedience that had kept her quiet for months.
"Sergeant," the first sergeant barked, defaulting to authority. "Where are you going with that?" "Out," she answered. Before the next word landed, a call sign she knew cut off mid-sentence. Another voice stumbled in, gulping air. 200-meter roll stands, Colonel Valerius repeated, as if saying it could conjure cover. No one moved. Men who had laughed now stared at their hands. The ones who had whispered found nothing to say. Officers rearranged procedures.
The monitors kept reporting a reality that didn't care whether anyone was comfortable. Aris slung the rifle. She looked from screen to door and back again. The angles out there were wrong, but not unsolvable. The distances were brutal, but not outside the rifle's reach. She pictured the shallow saddle on the near ridge, a firing lane carved through the chaos. 2 shots to break the geometry, a third to keep it broken. No one asked her plan. No one asked anything. The room had decided waiting was safer than choosing. She had been patient. She had been silent. She had written doctrine in notebooks no one read. Now the valley posed the oldest question, and she already knew the answer. She breathed once, and for the third time spoke softer, steadier. "I can end this." They ignored her. Aris didn't wait for approval. She walked out of the command center with her rifle across her chest, helmet clipped low, jaw set like iron. No one followed. No one stopped her. The men who had mocked her sat in silence, watching the feed, content to let rules write an obituary for 480 Legionnaires. What does it feel like to defy everything you've been taught, everything your command represents, all for a distant, desperate hope? To step out alone, knowing failure means not only your own end, but the end of everyone you're trying to save. She moved through the compound like a shadow, past armored transports crusted in dust and crates that reeked of fuel and sweat. Her boots struck the parched earth with a rhythm steadier than her pulse. In her vest pocket, her father's old dog tag tapped against her chest with each step, the metal worn thin by his years of service, and now, hers. The letters fading, but the meaning never forgotten. At the edge of the compound, Aris Thorne checked her load. The suppressed M193 Long-Range System slung across her shoulder, spare magazines secured tight in their pouches, rangefinder clipped to her gear, and notebook pages folded into a plastic sleeve tucked close to her chest. She carried everything she needed, not for glory, not for protocol, but for geometry and survival. The climb toward the Overwatch Ridge was brutal. Loose shale slid beneath her boots, the steep slope resisting each step. The air, already thin, seemed to thicken with the effort. She kept her body low, moving with the patience of someone who had rehearsed this approach in her head 1,000 times, every handhold, every shift of weight, ingrained. Dust clung to her sweat-streaked face, and sharp rocks scraped her sleeve. Still, she pressed on, breathing steady, until she reached a ridge crown bent just enough to hide her silhouette from the valley floor below. She dropped prone, settled the bipod, and let the world collapse into her scope. Below, chaos was alive and visible. Legionnaires huddled behind burning vehicles, trapped under sheets of withering fire from every direction. Muzzle flashes stitched angry red seams across the ridges. Anti-armor teams scrambled, hunting for clean angles. Dust rose in violent, choking clouds where heavy rounds chewed into the earth. The battalion was being devoured in slow motion, minute by agonizing minute. Aris pressed her cheek against the stock. Her crosshairs locked on a heavy weapon nest perched 900 meters out on a rocky spur. The weapon spat fire in a steady, rhythmic stream, pinning an entire squad to the dirt. She exhaled. The reticle froze, a tiny, perfect black cross against the target. She squeezed. The suppressed crack whispered into the valley, barely a breath of sound. A heartbeat later, the gunner crumpled, the weapon falling silent. For a moment, a strange, disorienting stillness settled over the valley. Legionnaires lifted their heads in confusion, their movements hesitant. Then the radios erupted. "Who's shooting? Command, do we have air cover?" "Negative. No close air support cleared." Aris chambered another round, her eyes already shifting, sweeping for the next threat. Her second target revealed itself, an anti-armor team, one man holding the launcher, the other feeding a rocket. Barely 70 meters from a pinned squad, the tube aimed toward a smoking armored transport. Aris measured the arc, read the subtle smoke drift from a nearby burning vehicle, and fired. The gunner dropped before he could launch. The rocket clattered harmlessly into the dirt. Legionnaires on the ground shouted through the net, "What the hell? Who the hell's covering us?" She gave no answer. Instead, she crawled forward 3 meters, shifting her angle, keeping her outline fused with the rock, a part of the Kandar landscape. The enemy reacted quickly. Sniper glints sparked across the opposite ridge, sweeping like searchlights, hunting for her. Aris pressed flat, her heartbeat a calm, steady rhythm against the dust. Her fingers traced the cool dirt until its coolness bled into her, steadying her. Inch by inch, she slid sideways until she reached cover behind scattered stone. She propped the rifle again, scope cutting toward the valley's northern lip. She worked methodically. Each shot wasn't about numbers, wasn't about a kill count. It was about cutting threads. A command node collapsed mid-order, leaving his squad scattered and bewildered. A heavy weapon gunner on the western slope jerked back from his tripod, the line of fire broken, his barrage sputtering into silence. A squad leader rallying fighters vanished into dust, his charge disintegrating into confusion. Every squeeze wasn't subtraction. It was addition. Gaps widened. Silences lengthened. Each trigger pull bought the pinned Legionnaires a few more precious breaths, a few more seconds of life. The carefully constructed kill box began to unravel. On the net, confusion shifted into a dawning realization. This isn't air. This is a rifle.
Who's got overwatch? Eyes left. Something's cutting the spurs.
Aris's breathing slowed further. Her world narrowed to pure geometry. Distance, wind, time. She swung the scope, calculated holdovers in a blink, and executed without hesitation. Her sleeve snagged on a sharp rock as she shifted position, sliding up her arm. For the first time in months, the tattoo on her forearm was exposed. The stylized sniper emblem, clear, undeniable, earned. Not decoration, not mistake, but identity. Her scars, too, caught the harsh sunlight. Thin, white lines along her knuckles, faint burns that had never fully healed. They spoke of a past she never revealed, missions etched into her skin that others had erased from her record for political expediency. But now, those scars shouted louder than any dismissal. "Command, do you see this?" a lieutenant on the ground yelled, his voice ragged with disbelief.
"We've got a ghost on overwatch!"
Then, a grizzled voice, rough and unmistakable, cut into the net. Commander Kale, the Legion's assault element commander, moving with the battalion.
"Call sign check," he barked. "Who the hell's covering us?"
Aris Thorne didn't respond, but someone else did. A comms tech on the operations net, with access to her file, whispered in shock.
"Spectre 7. It's Spectre 7.
The net froze. That heavy silence where everyone listens. Commander Kale's tone shifted, suspicion melting into awe. "Wait, Spectre 7? That's Aris Thorne." A stunned pause followed. Then a Legionnaire's voice came, breathless. "No way. Deadweight is Spectre 7. And suddenly, the battlefield itself seemed to hold its breath. Because Spectre 7 wasn't a name for mockery. It was a call sign whispered at sniper school, tied to impossible shots and unconfirmed ranges. A legend built before politics shoved her aside. Back in the command room, Colonel Valerius went rigid, staring at the feed, at the flicker of her rifle in the dust. Realization spread over his face like a slow, cold shadow. The support detail no one wanted, the dead weight he had dismissed, was the only thing holding the battalion together. The officers around him, moments ago clinging to the fragile shield of protocol, now watched the screens with a growing, horrified awe. The insults, the laughter, the dismissive gestures, they hung in the air, a bitter taste to every man who had uttered them. How does a single act of courage, born of discipline and defiance, fundamentally redefine a battlefield and the fate of 480 lives? Aris ignored it all. She kept firing, her scope dancing ridge to ridge, opening seams where walls had stood moments before. The kill box unraveled into a corridor. The valley, which hours ago had seemed a tomb, was slowly, painstakingly shifting into an escape route. She never raised her voice, never demanded credit. She just pulled the trigger again and again, every shot answering the doubt that had stalked her for months, every round a silent, brutal refutation of every whispered insult. And in that moment, every legionnaire who had laughed, every sergeant who had dismissed her, every officer who had sidelined her, watched as Sergeant Aris Thorne, Spectre 7, rewrote the battlefield one round at a time. What had felt like a coffin hours earlier now shook with rotor thunder. Dust spiraled into choking clouds as the first transport helicopters dropped into the corridor she had carved with her rifle. Legionnaires stumbled and sprinted toward the landing zones, some dragging wounded comrades, others covering with their last rounds. Every one of them knew the line between massacre and miracle was a single rifle hidden on the ridge. Aris stayed prone, cheek pressed against the cold stock, eyes fixed through glass. Each helicopter arrival brought new, urgent targets. Muzzle flashes too close to the landing zone. An enemy fighter racing for a last, desperate shot. A shadow shifting where none should be. She cut them down with the same cold patience she'd shown on the range. Half-second squeezes, controlled breaths. Each shot a final, grim act of protection. Then the radio crackled with something new. Not static, not desperation, but hope. First chalk is up. Wounded aboard. Second bird inbound. Corridor holding. Commander Cale's voice, firm and measured, declared over the net. Command, this is Trident Actual. Spectre 7 has us covered. Repeat, Spectre 7 has us covered. Her call sign raced through the net like an electric current. Voices steadied. Legionnaires who had been gasping now spoke with crisp precision. The fight shifted from desperate survival to an organized extraction. The sound of rotors beating the air, a thumping in the chest, became the new heartbeat of the valley. Aris tracked each inbound and outbound aircraft, her rifle an extension of her vigilance. She spotted a glint, a subtle movement, an enemy sniper setting up to target the exposed Legionnaires during their sprint to the extraction birds. Without a moment's hesitation, her crosshairs found the hidden position, and a single, suppressed crack cut the threat short. The metallic taste of adrenaline coated her tongue, a constant companion since she had left the command center. She cleared her mind, focusing only on the geometry of the valley, the trajectories, the wind shifts. Commander Cale's voice, now a beacon of authority, cut the remaining chaos.
All units report accountability.
One by one, squads checked in. At first, there were gaps, silences where names should have been, a sickening lurch of dread. Then, slowly, those silences filled with voices. Bravo secured. Charlie accounted for. Delta moving to bird. Each check-in was a physical weight lifted from the air in the command center, a breath collectively held and then released. The officers there, who had hours ago been preparing casualty lists, now listened with an almost disbelieving intensity. When the last squad leader checked in, Commander Cale exhaled into the net, a sound that carried the immense weight of the hours just past. All 480 accounted for. 0 left behind. The words hit harder than any gunfire. 0 left behind. An outcome no one in the command room had believed possible, not when the ambush first tore open the valley. Aris Thorne didn't celebrate. She cycled the bolt, swept the ridges one final time, her eyes tracing every shadow, every rock formation, until the last transport helicopter lifted into the sky. Only then did she ease the safety on and lift her cheek from the stock. Her hands stayed steady, her face unreadable, betraying no hint of the fatigue that now settled deep in her bones. The impossibility of success rang in her ears, a profound silence after the cacophony of war. The climb down was slower, every step heavy with a profound fatigue she refused to show. The setting sun cast long, skeletal shadows across the ridgeline, painting the sun-scorched wastes in hues of blood orange and deep violet. By the time Aris reached the compound's edge, transport helicopters were already landing, their rotor wash kicking up choking clouds of fine, bone-gray dust. Battered Legionnaires spilled out, some moving under their own power, others carried on stretchers by medics rushing to meet them. The air still vibrated with the residual thrum of powerful engines, but the pervasive sound of combat had been replaced by something new, something almost deafening in its absence. Silence. Not the silence of mockery or dismissal, but of profound, heavy respect. Legionnaires lined the path into the compound. No laughter, no smirks. Helmets were tucked under arms, eyes fixed on her as she walked past. Men who had once shifted away from her in the mess hall now stood firm, shoulders squared, acknowledging her with a silent, unbroken gaze. She felt their stares, a palpable weight on her skin, but she didn't return them. Her rifle hung at her side, sling cutting across her chest, boots pressing a quiet trail in the dust. The only sound she heard was the rhythmic tap of her father's dog tag against her vest, a steady heartbeat against the stillness. What does true recognition feel like when you've already proven yourself in the crucible of combat? Not for glory, but for duty. At the far end of the silent line stood Colonel Valerius. His posture was regulation perfect, jaw locked tight. When she stopped before him, the weight of the entire compound pressed into the silence between them. His eyes, usually dismissive, now held a deep, troubled intensity. "You disobeyed direct orders," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut the desert air. Aris stood at attention, rifle resting at her leg. "Yes, sir." The pause stretched an eternity. Men around them held their breath, waiting for the inevitable disciplinary hammer to fall. Then Valerius's voice softened, cracking under something older than doctrine, heavier than rank. "You saved a battalion." The words landed like a verdict. For the first time, his eyes actually met hers. Not her name tape, not her file, not the whispers surrounding her, but her. Before she could respond, Commander Cale stepped forward. Dust streaked his uniform, grime clung to his helmet, his eyes bloodshot from hours in the fight. He stopped in front of her, raised his hand in a sharp, crisp salute, and held it with the kind of weight that turned a gesture into a monument. "Spectre 7, he said, his voice formal but thick with sincerity, with an undeniable awe. "The valley owes you." Behind him, Legionnaires shifted. Helmets came off. Some lowered their heads. Others whispered, quiet, reverent. "She carried us." "Dead weight saved the battalion." "No," another answered, his voice firm. "Spectre 7 did." The stillness broke into an ovation. Not wild cheering, not the enthusiastic shouts of celebration, but the deep, resonant sound of men honoring something greater than themselves. Hands clapped, boots stomped, voices murmured in a reverence too profound for loudness. Aris Thorne didn't smile. She didn't gloat. Her face remained a mask of calm composure. She simply lowered her eyes and said, "I was just doing my duty, sir." Colonel Valerius nodded once, slow and deliberate, as if the motion itself admitted how profoundly wrong he had been. Commander Cale dropped his salute and extended a hand. She shook it, her grip steady, her old scars visible against his calloused palm, a silent testament to her unseen past. For Aris, it wasn't vindication. It wasn't even relief. It was accuracy. She had done exactly what her training demanded, what her father's lessons had prepared her for, what her notebooks had whispered in the quiet of long nights. She had seen the geometry, and she had solved it. The ovation followed her as she walked toward the armory, the dog tag on her chest tapping against her vest with each step, steady as a heartbeat. Inside the armory's cool, dim light, she set her rifle on the bench and began her ritual, stripping it down, cleaning every piece, logging each shot into her notebook. The numbers mattered. The method mattered. Recognition was noise. But outside those walls, something had shifted forever. The Legionnaires who once mocked her would never again call her dead weight. The officers who had dismissed her would never again ignore her hand in a briefing. The silence that once carried jeers was now filled with a respect too heavy to be spoken aloud, a silent agreement etched into the compound's very dust. And for the battalion, the story would live in the only way stories ever survive, retold by those who were there. "We should have died in that valley," they would say, their voices hushed. But Spectre 7 was watching. True courage, the whispers remind us, doesn't always roar. Often it waits, quiet, steady, unseen, until the world finally needs it. And when it arrives, it doesn't ask for recognition. It simply does its duty. And in doing so, changes everything. One sniper, overlooked and doubted, refused to let protocol bury 480 Legionnaires. Her rifle rewrote fate, turning a kill box into a corridor of survival. Sergeant Aris Thorne, Spectre 7, proved that patience and discipline can alter history when courage refuses to stay silent. Her legacy, not of glory, but of duty performed when all others faltered, shifting history one round at a time.